with the backdrop of your book. You recently wrote a book entitled The Nonprofiteer's Fundraising Field Guide. A very intriguing book title. Maybe we'll get into that in a bit. Now, throughout this book, though, you really focus on what effective leadership looks like, and you focus on servant leadership. I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but maybe it's an old-fashioned way of looking at leadership, but I love it. I resonate with the term servant leadership. And I thought I would start today with a quote you include in your book that really resonated with me. And that quote was from John Burkhart and Larry Spears, who said this, inspired by Greenleaf, I believe. True leadership emerges from those whose primary motivation is a deep desire to help others. Now, I couldn't agree more with this sentiment, but why did this quote have such an impact on you for you to include it in your book?
There are in the lore of servant leadership, there are a lot of quotes that and phrases and sayings and speeches that sort of follow that sentiment. And I would say that I'm not unique in having the experience of having um, this type of idea modeled for me in my upbringing. We lived in a house, not a tiny house, but not a big house, growing up about 10 people. We had both sets of grandparents, my parents, my brother, couple uncles, one of my father's friends when he was going through some hard times. And so this idea of helping others and being of service were kind of baked into who I was and who my family was and is very young. And I proudly have taken that with me through my formative years. And it's probably no surprise that I landed then in the social impact nonprofit sector for this very reason. Um, and by the time I arrived at learning about servant leadership formally, it really just made a bunch of sense to me. It's like all the things that I believed in, all the things that I saw modeled for me through my parents and my family. It was probably about 10 years or so ago, came to some work. You mentioned Larry Spears, he was one of my professors in grad school at Gonzaga University, has stayed. He and I just exchanged letters because I have an old spirit and we do that kind of thing. He was a co-author for a book and a co-editor for a book called Fortuitous Encounters, and that book probably came out about 10 or 13 years ago, or 10 or 11 years ago, and it did these little vignettes of servant leadership, maybe like 3 to 4 pages, so like perfect for this generation. If you want sort of like the TikTok version of a leadership book.
That's right.
And all these great little stories about, one of the authors was in a cab ride and really led a servant leader conversation with the cab driver. One of the other authors was at a dinner. I forget how they got on the topic of carpet, but at a dinner with Coretta Scott King, MLK Jr.'s wife, and they were talking about carpet and how the Kings decided not to have carpet because the people that they chose to lead were poor and they could not afford carpet. And this notion of leadership is not what you get by being a leader, but what you give up by being a leader. And so all of this sort of wove together for me in this understanding that servant leadership was hella cool. I think it's the way to go about it. And I found that to be very similar to what I experienced growing up. And I've been in nonprofits now for 20 years, and a lot of the stuff that I saw done really well in the nonprofit space.